Hi, and welcome to the FLTMAG's first video interview. The FLTMAG is a publication of IALT, the International Association for Language Learning Technology. We've been conducting print interviews with members, and IALT recently approved a series of video interviews known as the IALT Interview Project. We've merged these into a single effort, so the videos will be featured on FLTMAG as one of the various types of articles and offerings that it publishes. You can find us at FLTMAG.com. I'm Dr. Jeffrey Samuels, and with me today is Dr. Kathryn Murphy-Judy. We will be discussing various aspects of online teaching and learning in the context of world languages. So, Kathryn, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Could you please introduce yourself in terms of your background for those colleagues who may not know you?
Okay, sure. So I'm Kathryn Murphy-Judy, but you could drop the Judy off if you want to. I haven't been married to Dr. Judy for quite a while. I did my undergrad and master's at Colorado State University in French, and then I did my PhD at the University of Minnesota in French language and literature with a specialization in medieval and then even more specialized medieval Provençal philology and literature. And during my doctoral studies, I focused on critical literary theory, medieval languages and literatures, and language pedagogy. I always had both the teaching and the lit going on in my background. I've taught on 5 continents in post-secondary language departments. And here in the States at the University of Arizona, the University of St. Thomas, Carnegie Mellon University, and then I've taught in various teacher preparation programs. I've been a tenured associate professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, we call it VCU, for over 20 years. And right now, I'm the coordinator of languages and the director of liberal studies for early and elementary education, but that's another hat. I'm also the mother of 2 astounding children, Ashanfara and Alejandra, and I am the very, very proud and happy grandmother of Asia Sophia. I'm just going to talk real quickly about my technology background. I actually started in high school in a math club where I learned to program in Fortran on the University of Denver big mainframes. It was just crazy stuff with the card punching and having to submit your program and then come back a week or 2 weeks later to find out if your program even run. And this is just to kind of bring us up to where we are now and how lucky we are now to be teaching and learning in the world that we have online. My dissertation, I input all of the Roman de Flamenca, it's a 13th century Provençal romance, onto these 13-inch, they were huge floppy disks, and then got them processed through a concordancing program, which the digital text and the concordance are still available through the Artful Project, ARTFL. And then my dissertation advisor, who became chair of the department, he just brought everybody into the digital age by making us do word processing. Oh my gosh, this is when we were still working on typewriters and we had carbon paper and whiteout. I mean, just to look at how the technologies have progressed and so quickly is pretty amazing. My ex and I had one of the first, PCs that you could buy at your home. And then when I graduated with my dissertation, I went down to the University of Arizona, but I was working on a translation of Paul Zumthor's Introduction à la Poésie Orale. And so I needed a portable computer, and I got one of the first portables. The thing was just huge. It was just immense, but that's what we called portables back in the day. When I got to the University of St. Thomas, that's where I discovered the Apple Macintosh. 1986, saw it at a conference, fell in love with it. Then I wrote a grant to Apple Computers and got it to get this just amazing equipment for me and my colleagues. And I started producing multimedia, doing HyperCard plus video discs. And when I went to Carnegie Mellon, I actually started creating a video disc with my absolutely wonderful colleague there, Chantal Cornouet-Jols. We were doing digital comparative international advertising. And I just want to say I just owe so much to her. Unfortunately, she passed quite a while ago, but she had a lot to do with everything that I've become. At any rate, from there, I went to Virginia Commonwealth University because of Bob Godwin Jones. I think a lot of folks know who he is. And because of Bob, I had a chance to be at the forefront of creating some of the very first language teaching and learning websites that were on the internet, the World Wide Web at the time, back when there was no WYSIWYG. You know, what you see is what you get, HTML coding programs. I mean, you had to actually hard code in everything that you were writing over and over again. It was laborious. I remember having dreams at night where I was coding, or maybe they were nightmares, who knows. But at any rate, I have just had this exhilarating career teaching and learning with new technologies. And I like to call them teachnologies because I'm always looking at where tech is built around sound teaching and learning strategies. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, maybe a little bit more than anyone wanted.
Oh, that's great. And actually, it's a good segue because I wanted to ask you, pivoting a little to the topic at hand, how did you become interested in online teaching and learning, what used to be distance learning, and I suppose in some ways still is, but in any event, the field of online teaching and learning, I know, for example, we've known each other for a long time, but recently through the distance learning SIG that Actville has, and you're very well involved in that and a leader in that. So could you talk a little bit about how you transitioned? I know it's related to technology, but specifically online teaching and learning.
Okay, well, and I can go all the way back on that too, because I first started teaching distance when I was a grad student at the University of Minnesota, and distance French at that time was sending out worksheets. The students had a book, I had a book. I'd send worksheets to the students, they'd fill them in and send them back. I'd send them cassette tapes and they'd have to record their answers back. You know, it was I knew that it wasn't communicative language learning, but it's what we had technologically at the time. I also had a chance on a grant to do some slide tape lectures. So I started thinking about ways of teaching what we call asynchronously now, but with much older technologies. So that was a really good experience that I had. And I also had another research grant where I wrote up a report in 1983, I think it was, on everything that was available in computer-assisted language learning at the time. And I think we came up with about 100 different programs. Most of them were just, you know, here's a word, they were flip cards. There was nothing interactive and so on. But I did get a chance to go see at the Control Data Corporation. I got to see Plato in action, which was pretty cool back in those days. You know, so as I've stayed working with technologies, and every time I get a chance, if I can pull it into my classroom, if it's good for teaching and learning, I do. So by the 1980s, I was already thinking that it would be possible to have a classroom where the classroom walls disappeared and we were able to teach languages across these open digital spaces. And so my thinking and practices really started expanding with the new affordances. It's like they prompted me to think differently about what is possible. So some of my early work at St. Thomas and Carnegie Mellon was working towards asynchronous modes of language learning using multimedia. And at Carnegie Mellon, once again, I was doing distance French, but by that point, I could put exercises both on the server and on diskettes. And so the students were able to interact and do different kinds of, they were mainly grammar and vocabulary exercises. They still had cassettes, but I think I was able to start doing sound clips at that time. And then I was able to start sending video clips and have them interacting with video. And I remember thinking that I was just doing something awfully hotty-toddy when I decided that these online students, they were all campus students, but that I would have them doing interactive meetups. So they would have to meet with somebody and do some kind of learning task and then report back on it. And I thought that was pretty exciting, but we didn't have cell phones at the time to do the recordings or anything. So, I was really excited about interactivity with delivering language and cultural instruction with lots of images and lots of videos, and doing the interactivity with the video discs. That was pretty cool. And then, like I said, when I got to VCU, Bob had me creating HTML, and that's when I started creating online French sites. And I also started teaching my colleagues how to code in HTML and how to script JavaScripts so that they too could be producing interactivity. Now, Bob had created what was called Web Course in a Box, and it was one of the first LMSs, but he made sure that it worked for languages because he was coming out of a language program. And then Blackboard bought up Web Course in a Box because it was his biggest competitor, because he was giving it away free. And so Blackboard saw that competition, and free is hard to compete with. But at any rate, once we had Blackboard, or it might have been Course Information or Web Course in a Box, I remember I started doing hybrid courses. I had one in French literature where we still didn't have a lot of interactivity, so it was mainly discussion boards that I had the students working on. And just speaking of that really quickly, I found through the discussion boards that if I had those done before we actually came into class and talked about the literature, the students who weren't as high in their oral proficiencies were much better able to handle the face-to-face class after they had done the online discussion boards. And so that really gave them a boot up in their language acquisition. But then I also had intensive French. And every Friday we had classe pyjama, where we just stayed home. We went on Blackboard. Again, we didn't have a lot of synchronous interactivity. Well, it was quasi-synchronous, where we would be text chatting with each other because we didn't have the audio video capability. And I don't know, that just really taught me a lot about the importance of social presence in online teaching and learning. And I hadn't read Garrison yet, but I already was seeing that, they really have to have a community of learners, a community of practice in order to benefit from online learning. So at any rate, we moved from Web 1.0 to 2.0, and now we're in 3.0. And I've done what I can to stay on top of what's really good to positively impact student learning online or hybrid or flip modes. My first entirely online course, I started in 2010. There was a provost's initiative for online teaching and learning. And I started with I guess I started with 101, but then I created all the way the whole first and second year program and started teaching that online. And I can tell you, because VCU didn't know what it was doing, none of us who were doing this really knew what we were doing. It was such an emergent field. And I made a lot of mistakes, and I learned a lot from making mistakes. And I guess what I would say to the students is, like, we're all new at this. So if we make mistakes, let's just be very sympathetic and empathetic towards one another and just roll with the punches. But yeah, I learned a lot of what to do and what not to do by that. But about that same time, maybe it was that next year, I was looking around at Calico and IALT and Actful, and I was noticing there was a growing number of people who were starting to teach online. So I tried to contact everybody I could find from those organizations And we started to get together at ACTFL and at Calico conferences, and we kind of morphed into this basic online language design and delivery, BOLD, B-O-L-D-D, collaboratory. And so, you know, in this sort of loose affiliation of scholars and practitioners, we started to share what we knew, what we were doing. We started giving workshops and just having fun and doing a lot of good things. And so, you know, this summer, or actually in the spring, suddenly we were very much on call. And this summer, the people who have been in the BOLD group, we've been giving a lot of webinars and workshops online. But now we have the ACTFL mentoring program, the DL-SIG, Distance Learning SIG mentoring program that we do with the National Foreign Language Resource Center. And for anybody who's interested, the NFLRC has up on its website a bunch of videos and actually TED Ed lessons that will help you work through different aspects of online teaching and just, you know, gathering the skills and practices for doing that better. So that's kind of another long, involved history, Jeff.
Appreciate it. So I heard a couple of, when you went back to some of the earlier days, you were reflecting on some of the challenges there. Were there any other challenges early on that that you needed to face? I heard, for example, you had to deal with synchronous versus asynchronous. There were, I'm sure, bandwidth issues. You nailed diskettes to students. Having to deal with all of the technology issues. And are there any others that you might want to add in that are not really an issue today, but were earlier on?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there always been issues of hardware and software and wetware. And wetware is about people's thinking and their attitudes. And I think that's some of the harder things to overcome. But I think I'd mentioned already that if I went to do my multimedia work, I had like all of these different machines and I had to drive wherever I was going because it was just, the technology was huge. So once we got laptops, things started to get so much easier. And then of course, iPads make it even easier and more mobile than that. But yeah, I mean, I had video disc players and speakers and monitors, overhead projectors, interface, cables like crazy. I had so many cables, and you had to remember if it was a SCSI or this or that. It was just amazing. Now I don't have to bring anything with me. You know, as long as there's going to be a computer there, it's all up on the cloud, and all of my work is just readily available. And back in the day, you know, you had the Apple camp and you had the PC camp, and they just didn't touch it. Of course, there was also a little bit the Linux camp too, but mainly it was the fighting or the infighting or the dividing line between Apple and PC. And even if you were in one OS, if you were in Apple or if you were in the PC world, the Windows world, it wasn't easy to work between programs. The programs had all of these different formats. And so, you know, it was just constantly trying to figure out if this went with that and so on. And then we even had campus wars about whether it was an Apple campus or a Windows campus. So yeah, but like I was saying, the biggest problem was the wetware. I was told way back in the day, don't even start to do computer-assisted language learning until you have tenure. And then even when I did get tenure, and fortunately, at least some of my work counted for getting tenure, I still had to fight with my colleagues over the viability of online teaching and learning. And, you know, I already mentioned it. It wasn't until this spring when we had the emergency remote teaching that suddenly my colleagues recognized the importance of online teaching and all of the skills that it takes to be able to do that, that it's not just something you do because, you know how to turn on a computer. So that wetware of colleagues and administrators is one of the problems, but it's also a problem with the students because they have these attitudes. They're getting better, but they've had these attitudes about online learning that it means they don't have to pay attention because it's all online, so they can go back to it if they need to. And the students just still don't have really, really good skill sets in being online learners. I remember one student, she was in my 102 French class, and I went up to our language lab because I knew there were a number of students who were taking the class up there in the lab situation, and I wanted to see what happened. So I was up there teaching the class, and the students didn't know I was teaching the class in the same room that they were in. And Miss Thing was over there. She wasn't answering and doing the interactive work I needed her to be doing, or, that she needed to be doing. And, so I'm looking over at her and she's shoe shopping. And so I scooted my chair over and I waved at her and I said, je suis Dr. Murphy-Judy. And so she immediately flipped her screen off the shoes. And then I went back to working with the other students. And 2 minutes later, she was back getting her shoes, So we have had to learn a lot, the students and the faculty, about how to do learning and especially language learning online. But it's kind of sad, but it's, frequently the wetware, not the hardware and the software, that's the last to catch up.
Let me ask you, kind of related to that, a little bit about how successful we are in teaching and learning online compared to traditional face-to-face settings. And, like it or not, it's happening now, right? A number of us have been in favor of it and warmed to it, and you and others have delved right in. Others have been somewhat resistant. But the proof is in the pudding, right? So share a little bit about what the data tell us about student success in online language courses, and do they reach the outcomes in an equivalent manner? I'm thinking, actual proficiency levels, the 4 skills, and those sorts of things, because the outcomes are there, whether it's face-to-face, online, hybrid, high flex, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, like you said in the beginning, we didn't have any data because those of us who were in online teaching and learning, we were building the online courses. We were at a very experimental stage, and there were some people who were doing small studies. Overall, as the university systems went heavily into teaching online, and there were so many of those for-profit companies that were teaching all online, the studies were coming back and saying that there was a huge drop-off rate. It was like upwards of 70% of the students who started a class would drop out, and that there was a lot of dissatisfaction, that there weren't good learning outcomes. But we still didn't have good data on what was going on in languages. I sent out a survey through Bold that was about, I did it for 4 years, and I was looking at the design, the development, and the delivery of language instruction online, but I didn't go in too deeply into student learning outcomes. I did get anecdotal evidence from it, but nothing that I would feel confident publishing. However, Victoria Russell and I have just finished authoring a guidebook on designing and delivering communicative language teaching online. It's going to come out in July through Rutledge, Taylor, and Francis. And the 5th chapter is dedicated to what the research tells us. And I'm just going to kind of go through, Victoria had written this, and she discovered that, and I'm going to quote, she compared student satisfaction between online courses and face-to-face, and found that students who take language classes online have higher levels of satisfaction over time compared to their peers in traditional face-to-face language classrooms. And so she quotes Harker and Kutsantoni in 2005, Murday and Ushida and Chenoweth in 2008, Young in 2008 as well. And keeping in mind that student satisfaction and student learning outcomes have everything to do with the pedagogy that the teacher is using, the pedagogy that's built into the online classroom and that is manipulated through it. So she looked as well at learning outcomes, and there is some research that shows that oral proficiency gains are similar between online and traditional classes. Blake, Wilson, Chetto, and Pardo-Ballester in 2008 did some work on that, as did Chenoweth and Murday in 2003. And then there are other studies that have found that online language students actually outperform their counterparts in traditional courses in written production. So there is research by Chenoweth and Murday that was done in 2003. And then also outdoing the traditional classes in oral proficiency gains. And that's some much more recent work by Moneypenny and Aldrich that was published in 2016. So end all be all, the effectiveness of an online class and across the three modes of production, performance, and the four skills, it really depends on the online language teachers having had sufficient professional development in online language pedagogy. So, I mean, it takes those both. You need to know how to do the online, but you also have to know the really good pedagogical approaches and methods.
Yeah, they're interesting, and it's kind of what I would expect you might have said. I'm just thinking ahead to a year from now, 2 years from now, the number of action research articles and publications and things that are going to come out of this. So people are going to say, the pandemic happened. I had to adjust. Here's what happened. Here's what I've observed.
Yeah.
And I think there's going to be quite a lot of it. And hopefully, a number of well-constructed, really valid and reliable studies will come out to help underscore what you've been saying. I think that's
well, and one of the nice things about teaching online is, if it's an asynchronous course, everything is there. And
right.
the way most of the LMSs are right now, you're just pulling in all this data. So you just need to get the IRB and the permissions in order to be able to look at the data and then discuss it. And if you're teaching synchronously, if you teach Zoom or Blackboard Collaborate, you're recording it, so again, if you get those permissions, you get the IRB, you can go in and really look at what's going on and really get some helpful data and elucidate some practices that are working really well.
Let me ask you really from the perspective of students and then maybe from the perspective of faculty. So it's kind of two questions, but it's also the same kind of question is, what are some of the challenges that they tend to face? And you could take it together or, start it with learners and then with faculty, whatever. But new to the online world, particularly with regard to language learning online, what are some of the initial challenges and roadblocks and so forth that they tend to face, and how do they get over them?
Yeah. Oh, that is probably the question of the day. And I'm just going to address it in language learning online. And I look at how we talk about novice level, intermediate level, advanced, we go through the proficiency levels. And what I realized is that our learners, especially if they're coming into a lower level language course, they have a fourfold challenge when they start learning a language online. First of all, they're novice level in the language that they're learning, and they have, little to no communicative proficiency, reading, writing, listening, speaking. They can only handle the target language at pretty much the word level. But they're also novices often at learning how to learn a language, because as you learn a language, you learn the techniques and the strategies, the things that you need in order to be more proficient, more competent at being able to learn a language. So I think it's always easier to learn your second, third, and fourth language after you've learned one language because you've picked up those skills. They don't have them yet usually. And they don't have the disposition strategies that are going to help them. So we have to build those in. Third, most of the students, they may be really good at social media and using their computers and their devices and so on, but they're not skilled in online learning for academic purposes. They can find YouTube videos, they can, where they learn to dance or to knit or build robots, whatever, but traversing their, let's call it the zone of proximal development, where they have to deconstruct the schemata that they already have and their old habits of thinking that are language bound. And remember, they only have the beginning pieces of that language. All of these old habits and so on are impeding their recognition and absorption of the new knowledge, the new language, the new habits and skills. But they have to, in order to get the new worldview, to get those structures into long-term memory. So that's the third novice level that they have. And finally, they're almost always novices in how to learn a language online, because learning a language online is special. The target language is the means and the content of the course. And they're at the novice level. And so they really, really have to have a lot of scaffolding, but they also have to get that knack of being able to see it as almost a game, a puzzle, that it's fun enough, intriguing, engaging enough that they'll slog through the not understanding and not just throw their hands up and say, wait, this is too much for me, I'm dropping, I'm just going to take a face-to-face course. And especially if we abide by that 90% rule that ACTFL and, just language teaching in general encourages, that we use at least 90% target language in our classes. If we're doing that online, it's going to be really hard for these novice students. So they've also got an alien delivery mode, this online stuff, and then they've got content that's not familiar, so it's foreign, and everything is strange, foreign, different, and we really have to help them get over that. So how do we help them overcome all of those challenges? It starts with the design of the online learning. They need really clear orientation. So that needs to get rid of all of that advertising baloney and the campus myths that, oh, online learning is just easy. You can just kind of do it in bed or on the beach. The dogs can be playing. I had one student who was trying to take my French course while he was in the practice room in the music school. I mean, it's like, no, you can't practice your piano and do the class at the same time. So the students really have to get that orientation and recognize what this is going to take. They also, our students aren't what we call the really good students are the ones who know how to manage their time. And most of our students don't start learning that, especially not the first couple of years. And so we can use the online venue to help them learn how to frame out their schedules. But we also need to tell them how much time we think it's going to take for them to get through our interface and the instructions so that they can get down to the learning and the working and the doing. So, we have to make that really clear. And something I was reading for the book that Victoria and I have just put out was talking about, and it's true, I've seen it time and time again, that professors tend to underestimate the amount of time that it's going to take students to figure out what they're supposed to do as they're learning. So they need really clear and consistent work schedules. And then the work has to be broken down into chunks, and you have to give them clear timelines for each chunk to help them learn how to manage a task and keep on track. And then like with all learning, they really need to reflect on what they've learned, what they haven't learned, what they've been doing, what they haven't been doing, but they need to do. And so really building in a reflective piece into an online language classroom is super important. And I think using something like Linguafolio that plots out their proficiency-based integrated performance acquisition of the language and cultural competencies, it gives them just a really good frame, and they can see where they are, because the Linguafolio online gives them a visual, so they can see where they are as they're moving towards higher and higher proficiency. But it also has
Sorry,
a big reflective part on it.
sorry to interrupt. That includes the can-do statements as well, does
Yeah,
it not?
yeah. Oh, definitely. It's got the can-do statements. And then the students have different tasks that they're doing and assignments that are based in can-dos. And they have to give evidence that they have reached that target and then say to what level they've reached the target. So they really have to reflect on, okay, I couldn't do this at all, or I could kind of do this. I did it, or I did it really well. But they have to think about it. And then the faculty member, the teacher, gets to give the feedback and say, well, let's take a look at this. So, you thought you did this well, but, frankly, if you hadn't had all this scaffolding from this person and that person, you might not have been able to do this. So here, try another one. Can you do this one, which is the similar can do, but can you do this one on your own? So, yeah, the Linguafolio is just great, and a super help for getting students into thinking about what they need to do and doing that all important reflection.
What about faculty? Some of their challenges, and also, what do you see faculty gaining as instructors, as teachers, when they become more proficient at teaching online class?
Sorry about that. The phone, it'll go off right away. um, well,
I think
Victoria,
my
in the book, she underscores how lonely it is when you're just teaching by yourself, all alone. And she also underscores, that it's really important to have communities of practitioners for all of us to come together, kind of the way we are here right now, that we're sharing what we know with each other. And then FLTMAG is going to give us even more ways of being able to discuss and come together. Um, the emergency remote teaching that we've been doing, I think really has underscored the lonely aspect that there can be to this. And yet, I just gave a Calico workshop with several of my colleagues, and one of the participants, Sandrine Hope at the University of Tennessee, she started up this really cool podcast, which is for teachers who are facing cyberspace alone. And it's just a really great way for people to come together, talk, share. And I think that's one of the really good things that's coming out of our having to do more online teaching, is that we're becoming more participatory, more sharing and caring. And in addition to Sandrine's podcast, the language resource centers, ACTFL, the AATs, the regional groups like NECTFL and SCOLT, state associations, I'm in FLAVA, they've had so many things, various school divisions. Everybody has been coming to the rescue and really sharing and offering camaraderie and support in this time. And so it doesn't have to be lonely. If it feels lonely, you just need to get out there and find your group. But I think I'm going to say, first and foremost, so few of us are given the time and training that we need to create online courses and then transition to online teaching. I really need to underscore that what we've been doing with this emergency remote teaching is not online teaching. We started the semester face-to-face and had 2 weeks, maybe not even, maybe overnight, to convert to something that was online. And that is not online teaching and learning. It's crisis mode. It's overnight emergency convergence. But I do applaud each and every one of us who was able to take this plunge and did the absolute best that we could under the circumstances. But I'm going to say, if your school is expecting you to teach online in the fall, and you only have this summer to convert anywhere from 1 to 5 courses from what you've been doing face-to-face to online, that's, I'm going to put it out there, it's egregiously abusive, because you're not going to have the time that you really need, and it's not going to be good for you or your students. The BOLD survey showed, however, that most institutions only give faculty 3 to 4 months to create an online course. Some of the really stellar programs like Carnegie Mellon's Online Learning Initiative, the OLI, fabulous, but they had lots of money, they had a huge staff, and they had a couple of years to build what has become a super program online. So if you only have this summer, you may have enough time to design and deliver a couple of modules. You might even pull a full course together. That would be great. Get its orientation materials, its framework for scheduling and pacing, do all the assessments, their routines, the learning tasks, all the evaluation materials and their routines. And for you to get trained in online delivery is, and alpha and beta testing. I mean, it's just, before fall starts, just not possible. So, but I think a lot of us are faced with this. So I've said it's not possible. So what we have to do, if this is what we're faced with, is that, first of all, if your school has got instructional designers, go use them. Find one that you like and work with them. But what we can do, and this is reality quotient time, we agree on what the learning goals are, what the student learning outcomes need to be for the end of the fall semester, backward design from that point to the final assessment that is going to show that the learning goals and that all of the formative assessments have reached the goals. Then we need to figure out ways for the learners to reach those learning expectations. So we're backward engineering each of the steps to lead them up to that. We're giving in these things in manageable chunks. Each smaller chunk has its own assessment and its feedback, so the students can be kept abreast of what they're doing and know how they're doing and what they need to review and revise and get some more work on. And you know, we have everything set out with the 3 modes of communication, the interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational. They're getting work across the 4 skills and the intercultural competencies. So we know where we're going. We have that laid out. And then, you know, if I were listening to me right now and I've never done this before, I'd be freaking out. It is way too much to do over the summer. So you make it doable for yourself. You choose one course, you set up its design, you create modules leading up to it. You look for other people, and this is really important. I go back to the community of practice that we have. Find other people who are doing the same thing, beg, borrow, and steal. We're in the land of open educational resources. There's a lot of free and shared things from Coral and the National Foreign Language Resource Center, and Carla and Circle and Castles, the AATs, Merlot, which is fabulous because their resources have all been vetted by people like us. They've been used in classes. And you've got the Carnegie Mellon materials that they're in French and Arabic. Those can be inserted into your course or courses. So you have lots of, you don't have to do it all yourself. There are lots of wheels out there. You're eventually going to have your own wheel with all of its little parts to it, the gears and everything else. But for right now, do what you can. And for a lot of courses, if you've got, say, 3 courses you have to, or 4 that you have to deliver in the fall, and you've got a publisher that's got pretty good materials, design it around there and let it run. Maybe do 1 or 2 modules that are your own for that and plug those in. You can start small and build, but you really have to say at the end of this semester, what should the students be able to do? What are their can-dos? And then build your course toward that. So I would
let me ask you
avoid,
a question
yeah.
on that matter too, which is, so I've tried 2 different ways of organizing and planning for my own course development work. One is mind mapping, which is real free and it's fun and you get to use software, you design concepts and link them and so forth. The other way that I've done it is incredibly structured, even using something like Excel, where I'll have a series of criteria going on one axis and then across the other. So I'll have all the different things, different mode, presentational mode, interpretive mode. I want to make sure that all these things are there. Learning outcomes established, rubrics built, blah, 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 and list it all out and then just make sure that it's all there.
Right.
What would you recommend to somebody who is looking at dwindling time and a fall term start? Or is that more of a personal preference?
I think it has a lot to do with the person, how many technological skills they have, their connections and so on. I really like what you said about, plotting that out on an Excel spreadsheet. And I was going to say that the Castle's materials for Linguafolio, they just have this wonderful guidebook to using Linguafolio. They have worksheets that will help you build in a very IPA, integrated performance assessment way, a very proficiency-based way, a whole course or units in a course that build up to the whole course. And I think that they're very much like what you just said with the Excel, where everything's spelled out and you have it in a grid so you can see really clearly, I'm working on interpersonal speaking with them here, therefore their assessment is going to be on, so it's going to give them some interpersonal speaking and listening to do, and here's my rubric that goes with it. I think that is really, really important to map it all out. So like you said, either a mind map or doing an Excel spreadsheet or using these really great sheets that Castle has in their PDF guidebook that you can, either use, create with in a PDF through Adobe, or, if you're one of those people who likes to work on paper, you can use that. Yeah. And I was going to say one other thing about developing a course. In about a week, I'm going to email my students, because I have the list of who's going to be in my classes, and I'm going to start asking them what they want. I really believe in the power of students taking ownership for their own learning and having a say in what they're going to do. So I want to find out from them, and I did this before the emergency, but fortunately I'd already been doing hybrid with those students, but I still needed to find out what level of technology they have, what skill sets they have, the ease and comfort they have, what their desires are. But also, I want to find out what my students want to be talking about, because I think right now there's some really, really important topics for students to be talking about, and using language to think and globalize their way of thinking about things is really important, but it's also important to get their buy-in. So I know it helps eventually getting them towards self-directedness and gaining in more learning autonomy. So I really would be sharing, and I ask my students too, what are you using right now to learn languages? So that if they're using something, I can build it into my course because they like it and they use it. So just.
What about the idea of, you do as much as you can over the summer, but if fall comes, you're not really where you want to be. What about the idea of focusing on the first 2 weeks so that you have that ready and always staying a couple weeks ahead of the students, and instead of having the course ready all at once, you just, timed release it, so to speak? It's a loaded question because I already know the answer, but I'd like your perspective on it.
Best of all possible worlds, you have your course plotted out all the way through. If I were going to try to do that strategy, I would at least have my stuff ready to go up through midterm time, because just like what happened in the spring, we have to stay really flexible and know that everything that we're going to be doing is going to be taking more time than we thought it would. And especially an online course takes more time than we would have ever thought we would need. So, if you design and develop and deliver a truly online course and you have the time and the resources for it, it should all be pretty much set before you go in there. And I'm talking more like first and second year courses. I think when you get into third and fourth year courses, you get into literature courses, you can have, I'm trying to remember the terminology for it. There's tight structures and there's loose structures. And the more students have learned how to work within the field, and obviously the better they are at being online learners, the more you can have a loose structure in your course. But when they're in those first couple of years and they're really working on the language itself because the communication is so tentative, they need a lot more structure. They need a much tighter structure. I would say if you just don't have the time to pull it all together, and I kind of hate to say this, but go to the publisher's materials, because they've got the things worked out, and then you can do other things around those publisher materials that will start branching into you constructing your own course with your own modules, but still delivering the curriculum. So, yeah.
No, that's good. And I think in many cases, you don't have a choice. The department has adopted the materials. This is it. These are your chapters. This is the textbook. This is, but that in a way is a blessing, a bit of a, it's a relief to a certain extent, in that you've got a structure to build on, and the students know that,
Right.
Particularly if you're in a second or third semester, they're already used to that. So that. You mentioned a number of resources, and as we're dwindling toward the end here, I just wanted to ask if there were any other ones you wanted to call out. You've mentioned a number of foreign language resource centers that have put out information. You mentioned a book that you've got coming up, and I know that you've collected some resources for that specifically. So if there's anything in addition you wanted to recap or share about that?
I think I'm going to send some of this to you, and maybe you can just kind of add it in later on. Just some thoughts that I had.
We can put it on FLTMAG, but this will be a video. So,
yeah. But I might be able to send something to FLTMAG that would be sort of a companion to it. I mentioned that my colleague and I, Victoria Russell, we've written a book, and I'm going to see now if I think I can share something with you. And it's not to plug our book, but what I want to do is let you know that we've got e-resources that are a companion to this book. And anyone can go into the Routledge page, not have to buy the book, and still get to the e-resources. They're not up yet because the book isn't published yet. But as soon as it's out in July, there will be just pages and pages of different kinds of resources for all different kinds of areas. So there are resources for designing and resources for developing video materials and resources for gaming-like things. And anyone can get to those. So I just thought I'd bring that up and share it with folks. But I also know that the LRCs, and again, I'm going to mention the National Foreign Language Resource Center, they have amazing facilities there. And Carla, the Carla Wiki, I go to all of the time, and the Carla site. I would also go to the National Foreign Language Resource Center. They have this super cool thing. It's called a Personal Learning Network. And you go in and you look at what it is you want to do, and then it pulls up all of the different kinds of technologies that are available to us. So you say you want to do something in assessment, and it's an oral assessment. How can you do it? And they'll talk about, using Talk Abroad or Extempore or I'm forgetting the other one that I like so much, but it will bring up all of those utilities and so on. Merlot, again, I mentioned that. Merlot has got already vetted things. And then I would read Bob Godwin Jones's columns in LTI. He's got a column on technology for language teaching, and his approach is always pedagogy first and then technology. And he's great for showing you what's coming, so you can kind of do some of that futuristic thinking that's really fun and cool. And of course, FLTMAG, it's got all kinds of great things. So, we really do have a lot of resources right now. And so, yeah, there's quite a bit out there.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to go ahead and share the FLTMAG page in a second. But let me just, in terms of wrapping up, ask if you have any other concluding thoughts about where we are right now, particularly with the COVID-19 pandemic and this massive move to remote instruction, and what I personally think is just not going to fly in the fall. It's going to have to be much better online teaching and learning, much more quality enhanced. So any final thoughts? And I'm going to put the FLTMAG screen up in a second while you talk.
Yeah, I think that this is a time that's just stressful crisis. It is. But I also think it's a watershed moment for us in education. This is a time when we can really start reinventing language teaching to turn it into a better, more humane, more communicative and inclusive experience for everybody. I think, we've been bemoaning the erosion of language programs in post-secondary education, the MLA report, we're losing all kinds of language programs across the country. But right now is a time where the obvious need for a multilingual, multiliterate citizenry has never been more pressing and important. So it's up to us, and I always think, if you got lemons, make lemonade out of it, because I like to drink lemonade. But I think this is an amazing time for all of us to improve ourselves and to improve our teaching and to improve our world, all through what it is that we do professionally. I think we need to breathe deeply and very consciously about what we're doing. I think we need to dare to innovate and to find joy in all these new directions and this kind of instability that we've got. I think we owe that to ourselves and our students.
Thank you. That's really nice. Thank you for those thoughts, and thanks again for sharing your thoughts and expertise. Again, this was Kathryn Murphy-Judy from Virginia Commonwealth University. And if you're watching this video, I just want to invite you once again to find us at fltmag.com and to check out our organization, IALT, International Association for Language Learning Technology, at ialt.org. And look for future interviews and check us out on FLTMAG. Thank you again so much. I really appreciate your time today.
And just a quick plug for IALT as well. It's a great society. I've been a member for years, and Malt and everything. Join.
Yes, definitely. We need you. You need us. Yep, absolutely. Thanks again.
Well, thank you so much for this honor.
Yep. Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.